Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. This is episode. Why am I blanking?
Number 4,
Number
Brian.
4. Okay, that's why I need you. I need you to help me with my counting. All right, Brian Dewsbury, Knowledge Unbound founder, my producer once again, the excellent, the perpetual, the undergraduate class of 2025, Mr. Segev Amasai. Segev, what's up?
Well, doing pretty good. Ready to see what this week's about to offer, besides our 4th episode. So, tell me about your guest for this week.
So this week, and just as a reminder, Knowledge Unbound is brought to you by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, Open STEM Education. We are generously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. This week, we welcome to the studio Dr. Vijai Bhola. It was a special interview because, and you know, we'll unpack a lot of it during the interview itself, but Vijay and I go back since we were 16 years old from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and so you're interviewing him, right? But you're still looking at somebody who you knew as children, and I'm sure Segev, you have that feeling. I know you know people from Haiti that you went to school with.
Right.
As you're kind of watching each other grow up, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I was about to say, you've known each other for so long, and lived in the same country and all. So it's definitely a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, and part of it was, we remembered conversations that we've had as teenagers, right? Thinking about the things we wanted to do, and maybe being in a place where we're able to do at least some of it. So for you, my listeners, we talked to Vijay about his world travels, his volunteer work doing medicine. He's a medical doctor, a critical care specialist, but has done a lot of work internationally for after hurricanes, during wars. And so we get into all of the details of that, but also a sense of why those choices are made. So I hope you enjoy it. Welcome.
Hey, good morning, Brian. It's pretty good to be sitting down here doing something professional.
This is new for you. That's the last time I'm going to call it Dr. Bhola in this whole interview. I hope you know that, right?
No, I'll cease to respond unless you address me correctly.
We'll see about that. All right, here's the backstory. Vijay and I went to the same secondary school in Trinidad and Tobago, Presentation College. Just want to give a big shout out. And well, we've been very, very close friends ever since. I have had the immense pleasure just watching his life, his journey, the way he kind of thinks about his values and what he wants to do in the world, how he wants to impact people's lives. And this, for me, is an opportunity for him to share that journey with you. And just for my American audience, secondary school is like high school, but British system. So
which we finished in 1998.
Okay, you don't have to tell them the year, Vijay. Anyway, I instead of kind of reading off your way too long CV, I wanted you to get a chance to tell that journey. I want them to hear it in your own words. So walk us through, in as clearly as you can, but don't take the whole hour to do it. From University of the West Indies, Mount Hope Medical Complex, right, to Emory University School of Medicine. Tell us about that journey.
That's a very interesting summary of many years.
I didn't summarize anything.
That I am supposed to do, but I guess I could summarize it in a way by just breaking up the blocks of training. Essentially, as a doc, you do, your medical school. Depends on where you do it. In Trinidad, you go straight into medical school, as I did. Then you worked for a while as what you call a house officer, and there's a period of time between which I did worked as a house officer in Trinidad into starting residency here in the United States. After finishing residency, for lots of reasons, I took some time before getting back into formal training.
What did you do the residency in?
I did my residency in internal medicine.
Okay.
So I did that in Virginia Tech Carolina Clinic, and then I had some time on my hands where I went back to Trinidad for a while and came back to the U.S. and worked in Richmond for a while. During that period, though, I was able to start doing some courses like in tropical medicine, do some disaster work like in Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria. So, it was some time I was able to kind of refine some of the goals I would like to achieve. And that led me to end up doing infectious diseases, which I did at University of Massachusetts.
Let me interrupt there quickly because I feel like you're kind of bringing these things up. I mean, I get it just because I know you, right? But you're saying like you did some courses that helped you refine the goals you wanted to achieve. But was there something that led you to choose those particular courses, right? I mean, so doing the courses helps you refine your goals, yes, right? But was there something that said, "Oh, these are the things I need to do to help me go through that refinement process"?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good question. So, it's essentially wanting to practice medicine in a way that really just benefits society in a way that was unique. And so, the specialties I chose, the courses I did, was one that would allow me to sort of maximize my ability to help individuals in lower income settings. That was a pretty important aspect of what I wanted to do.
Why was it an important aspect?
I think that just being able to contribute in a real way is a very powerful thing. And I think also as a physician, we do have a nice ability to effect certain change. Like just looking at what some physicians, some models of mine have been able to do. It's pretty impressive the change that they can make in people's lives and in people's healthcare.
Well, let me play devil's advocate a little bit, only because some of the listeners to this podcast will be students, right? And many of the listeners of this podcast will be professors who, like myself, teach biology students. And as you know, in the U.S. context, most biology majors are pre-meds. we are well we are well endowed in terms of the amount of students who really want to go into med school. And one of the things we have when I am in conversation with them is this notion of they want to help people, right? And I get it. At 17 and a half, when they say that, they mean it in a very, very vague sense. And to some extent, I do view my role as a professor is helping them really think about what does help look like, and how does that would help kind of address your personal sense of why, right? So, you talked about wanting to help low income people and being impressed by the ways in which this field of medicine can be helpful, but you could practice. I would argue any kind of medicine you practice, you are in fact helping, right? But you said specifically low income people, and I'm trying to get at that part of the why.
Well, I guess I'll answer that question in a more of a bigger aspect in terms, more global aspect that, if you want to make a difference, or as we say, help people, it really depends on you and your motivation. So, and you could do that in any way that you feel best in your situation. So it could be anywhere, such as like a primary care practitioner, which is in such need in the US, for example, that if you're a good primary care practitioner, I mean, you really help people, like no two ways about it. I guess my perspective was, I've come from an international background, so to speak. I really like traveling, so I really have that appeal to, it really appeals to me to like be able to go to these different healthcare settings, especially where the income levels are a lot lower. The robustness of the healthcare system is a lot lower than we would see in the US or even in Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm from. So I feel as if, and this is my personal take based on my personality and my background. So when I say help, I kind of think of these backgrounds and these settings. So that's unique to my. And the other thing that I've always, while I was in medical school, someone told me about Doctor Borders, for example, and the idea of taking, helping people not just in a regular clinic, but in the time of most need, like when there's a disaster, when there's, wars, when there's genocide, when there's displacement. I want to think of creating a sort of job environment for myself and a sort of job description where you can be there for people at that time of need. And so that kind of drives me to create the sort of career, so to speak, or the kind of job opportunities that I can do just that. But really, it's up to each individual what really there's no formula for this.
Yeah.
And so however somebody wants to take it, whether they do medicine or not. I mean, like, being a really good teacher, being a really good community organizer. I mean, it's all the same. It's really about the volition you put into it, how you approach your particular career, your calling. That really determines, the impact.
Okay. So I interrupted you. You were talking about doing the courses that sort of helped refine your life choices, and I think you were about to talk about the infectious disease fellowship.
Right. So I did. I think there were two courses that were particularly motivating. A smaller tropical medicine course that I did
That's the one in London.
in Thailand.
Oh, Thailand. Okay.
Well, the Thai course was first. What was interesting in that course is that there were some other also emergency medicine doctors, and one of them, for example, was talking about how incredible he thinks point of care ultrasound is to make a difference. From that point of view of an emergency medicine doctor's point of view.
Can you briefly describe what point of care ultrasound is?
Okay, so when we think of ultrasound, we think of being referred to a radiology department and having an ultrasonographer do an ultrasound of the particular organ in question, like let's say the kidneys, for example, and then they send that to the radiologist who reads that and gives you a formal report. That's kind of what we think of an ultrasound. Point of care ultrasound is when the doctor who's taking care of you actually has a small unit, whether it's a roll into the office kind of unit or a handheld unit. And so that's where POCUS comes from. It's point of care ultrasound. That's the abbreviation. And that is pretty amazing because you can make decisions, sometimes life and death decisions, triage decisions right there on the spot. And what's really incredible about that stuff is that after the capital outlay of getting that unit and of course training the practitioners, it's actually a very useful thing in low income or what we call austere settings, like far out in the field. For example, paramedics can use this, or in low income settings in clinics, in places that they don't have a radiology department, they don't have a CT scanner. You can do some stuff with that machine that's quite powerful.
Okay.
And so that is one of those things that kind of inspired me. But the tropical medicine, just to step back a bit, what tropical medicine is really refers to diseases that you find in low-income settings for the most part, because what we call the global south, when you start thinking of malaria, TB, neglected tropical diseases, trypanosomiasis, these are things that are classically found in warm, low-income settings. And so tropical medicine and infectious diseases especially tended to be a pathway if you wanted to get into healthcare in lower income settings.
Okay.
We all know about the HIV epidemic that came pretty close to completely devastating sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Tuberculosis is still a very one of the top 10 killers in lower income settings, high child mortality from diseases such as tuberculosis. And these are considered to a large extent diseases of the poor just because of the places and how they spread, lower, more high density living, less basic healthcare infrastructure, etc. And so infectious diseases tended to be the pathway to really deal with, population health, public health on a lower income setting.
Okay. So you were in Thailand, you had somebody who kind of introduced you to POCUS.
Right.
Or at least brought it up, right? It sounded as though you're saying like, so that experience then led you to think about infectious diseases as a pathway to helping the population more broadly. Is that a correct interpretation?
It reinforced the idea of doing infectious diseases in that pathway because I was always a bit of it, but it also added the idea that point of care ultrasound was something that could be really, really helpful. Also, I would say in that case, infectious diseases, or ID as we say for short, is was on the cards. But it really added the concept of using point of care ultrasound in those settings.
So after Thailand.
Yeah, so after Thailand, I did this. I did this other course in London, the London Diploma of Tropical Medicine course, and I just remembered sitting there and being like, okay, yeah, definitely, I'm gonna. In the first week, it just reinforced to me, like the third or fourth day, they were talking about like tuberculosis. I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna do an infectious diseases fellowship. It's just like up to then I was kind of undecided. Do I need to do more training or just kind of work in trop med type settings without more formal training? But at that point, I was like, yeah, I definitely want to do infectious diseases formally.
Okay.
So that seasoned that firmed up that decision for me.
Okay. And then there was University of Massachusetts.
Yeah, so that's I did that at the University of Massachusetts, and the next step was actually a global health fellowship. But for that I went to Boston. I was at Beth Israel in Boston, but that's when COVID happened. So it became a little bit more difficult to travel internationally, and I ended up just hanging out there for a couple years doing some more research, and ended up doing a fellowship in disaster medicine while I was there, which is not
You might have the
something-
record for the most fellowships gathered.
the record for the strangest fellowships.
The MD is
that's for
actually in the
sure.
fellowships, the amount of fellowships, not the material itself.
And disaster medicine is like, it's such a new field. A lot of people in medicine are like, well, what is disaster medicine? And to some extent, it's a bit diffuse because, as my mentor would say, you're a physician first, and you're a disaster medicine practitioner second, because you have a day job. Right. You don't go to a clinic and deal with disaster medicine. When disasters happen, you deploy to them. So you basically have, a day job, and then you also do disaster secondarily. So that is pretty unique. But, that really dovetailed nicely into the idea of preventative public health, and how do you prepare yourself to deal with disasters when they do occur, and more importantly, how do you prevent? How do you set in place protections for when disasters occur? Because it's the setting in place protections and adaptations before they occur that really determine the outcome to a disaster.
Right.
Right. It's like, you don't really, it's not as much as focusing how to pull people out of the water, but ensuring that there are life jackets on board in the first place. That's the sort of mindset.
Yeah. Okay.
So with disaster medicine, that's the sort of thinking. And it's broad because it depends on, you think about climate change. How do we mitigate the effects of impending climate change, increasing floods, etc.? How do we make populations more resistant, more prepared for these occurrences? And also what we call complex humanitarian emergencies. So when there's a war, for example, or conflict, and then populations are displaced, how do you help manage that particular situation? Because that becomes very complex. How do you help people in those situations? So disaster medicine is a nice combination of that. Those types of things.
Well, so tell me a little bit what it was to wade in those waters, because I think a lot of people, definitely myself included, wouldn't naturally think of medical doctors being involved in the front line of climate change efforts. And I guess as you explain it now with disaster medicine, it makes sense because a lot of the disasters we're dealing with now has to do with climate change. But, how does one kind of think about, as identity-wise as a physician, being also, I don't know if climate change warrior is too strong of a term here, but, and even for you, right? Like just doing this fellowship, I don't know if before you did the fellowship, you thought of medicine and its role in climate change. What was it like kind of getting into that space? And then how do you see yourself now in terms of what we need to do as humanity for climate change?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And one, physicians tend not to be involved in that field, which is called, we typically call disaster management, right? And we tend to not think of this field as much, which is a real sad thing because all these things, every single disaster affects people's health. And so we should be involved, and we should be at the table making the decisions, helping to influence how these situations are managed before the disaster occurs, so to speak. It's in that preparation phase that you get most bang for your buck. If we talk about these situations such as climate change, it's so multifactorial. And at least there's one group that I'm also a part of, Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility. And they really advocate for things that you may not think is a physician's role. So climate change and nuclear war, they do a lot of advocacy in those situations, which they state are the two existential threats to human health and humankind and human existence. We'll take climate change first because that's the one you mentioned, right? But there's so many different aspects of climate change. So if it's warmer, if the air is dirtier, you become very susceptible to certain diseases. So let's say asthma and COPD exacerbations are much worse when there's a COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary
I just want to make sure people know you.
Right.
You want your doctor speak. Right?
we'll try to spell them out just to be on the safe side. Right. So if you have an underlying lung issue, and that could be asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you're really at the whim and fancy of the environment to some extent. Because if the air quality is bad, it just irritates your lungs more. That's just the way it works. So if you live in certain areas where there is a lot of particulate matter, parts per million they talk about, you will have more frequent exacerbations. You will go to the emergency room more often, and so that has a lot of impact on the individual patient. And it also has a lot of impact on the healthcare system. The healthcare system has to pay for these things. What we've also seen is during heat waves, for example, heat waves are the most prominent disaster we have in the United States. So when we had this,
I did not know that.
yeah, and this is the thing. It's really interesting. Like when we had the Pacific heat dome, the numbers of patients that went to the hospital for heat-related conditions really just went up exponentially. Of course, right? And at first, you really think of things just like, heat exhaustion and dehydration. Of course, you have those things coming in, right? People who are just out walking, they didn't realize it was that hot. They get really dehydrated, they pass out, they come in. But what we've also noticed is that people who have chronic diseases, heart attacks, strokes, etc., when the body is under stress, you increase your chance of getting getting things such as heart attack or stroke. And heat does that. Inevitably, just simply being warmer than you should be increases your risk of all those other health conditions occurring. So, and we've seen that. We've seen that when you have a heat wave, you have increased admissions for all these different diseases. And so, yes, I think as doctors, we should be at the forefront of advocating for these things, because we know that if we have climate change, if we have heat wave, heat events, we're going to have more patients in the hospital. So it's really important that we advocate for that type of thing.
Let me ask you one more question before I pivot to some of the international war zone work. Well, not just war zone, but other stuff. It seems to me that once you kind of crack the door of medical professionals should be part of the conversation, should be at the table in discussing some of these preventative measures that you mentioned. It also means that those professionals have to, at least on some level, understand the degree to which things like climate change have the disproportionate effects that you described on certain communities over others because of pre-existing factors. And so my question, I guess, no one's asking any one person to be an expert on all things, right? But to my question is, to what extent have you seen there's something infused in the education process of future doctors on that social component of these effects, whether it's disaster, whether it's any kind of health outcome? To what extent do you think there needs to be greater or more deeper education around that if you are going to be at the table?
Right. So I'm not sure what exactly is meant when you say the social component, but I would say from the health and public health component, medical schools are beginning to include climate change as part of their health curriculum.
Okay.
Which I think is really, really important, because for all the reasons we just discussed, if you're a physician and you don't understand these things, then you sort of see it as a one-off. Oh yes, it's warm outside, so we have a lot more people come to the hospital, and you don't connect the dots. You don't connect the dots, and you don't say, well, we need to have preventative care for this kind of thing. And there are ways to have preventative care. Ensure that, there are public cooling centers, for example, which is a lot cheaper than having to have people become sick and then come to the ER. But then even more than that, it's once you start having that awareness, then you start realizing, or you become more convinced that here we have to take steps to prevent this from happening. And then we come back to this whole climate change discussion. What can we do to decrease the risks of climate change? And even healthcare emissions, because of how large healthcare is as a sector in the United States, managing healthcare emissions in your own hospital is a new field that some hospitals are starting to take seriously. How do we ensure we recycle more? How do we ensure that we use our hospital resources in the most efficient manner? So there's a lot of room for improvement just within the healthcare system, the actual healthcare system itself, as well as to have healthcare professionals advocate on a broader view for preventative measures, both in the sense of when we do have a heat-related disaster, as well as preventing climate change in general.
Okay.
And hopefully with this increase, there continues to be much more education of healthcare practitioners. And I think even more than that, because education is one thing, but the education is something on paper that doesn't do the job itself. The idea that as practitioners, we have to be more vocal. We have to be advocates. We have to be, in a sense of community organization almost, because mobilizing people is how we really get things done.
But even with that, that is something that can be learned too, right? So I mean, I get what you're saying, that you want the spirit to be there. You want people to kind of have that internal motivation to be activists. But the act of community organizing is a thing that many other grassroots organizations have been doing for decades. And so if you're going to get into that space, is it good to sort of look towards existing groups who are already doing high-level advocacy to kind of learn what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely is important. And even when you say advocacy, I think within the medical field, we're so focused on the nuts and bolts and the science of things. Even as doctors, we don't really get together to talk about these things.
Yeah, it's all like professors.
We really love to talk about the latest drug for hypertension and the best management for heart attacks.
As well you should. I want you to do that too, right?
but the idea of even us educating ourselves and becoming, saying, okay, yeah, as physicians, we establish that this other concept is important. We're kind of slow to really mobilize ourselves even.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
to develop a sense of community around a topic.
All right. So let's do some traveling. Right.
Yes, let's
you
do
found some
traveling.
you found some time in between all of this stuff
Yeah.
to go to Puerto Rico, I believe, Bolivia, I believe, Ukraine, I believe. I think a couple were one I know definitely was in response to hurricanes. Tell us a little bit about those experiences, and I want you to start with Hurricane Maria first, just because there's so much to unpack with the last one. I guess I know what drew you there, but tell me a little bit what the experience was like on the ground, from both a physician and a personal perspective, what you learned from it, what you took from that to other experiences.
Right. I like the word experience, because it's one thing to read about a concept in a book, but it's another thing to go there and say, when you have the word displaced population, that you have a face and a story.
Right.
There's a person that that has become displaced, whose lives have been affected, who had to leave the island because the sector that they were working in was completely shut down because of the hurricane. And so, first of all, we talk about thinking outside the box. I think that's too short-sighted. I like the idea of living outside the box, understanding that we all live in boxes. We live in our own boxes. That's just how life is.
Right.
But when you step out of your box, and traveling is kind of a really good way to do that, then you enter other people's, little cubicles and their boxes.
Right.
And I think it doesn't really matter how much you read about something as a concept, but when you put faces to that concept, that to me really invigorates you to and makes you wake up to the idea, okay, this is something I would really like to have an impact, and this is something I'd really like to work on, because you don't do things because of abstract concepts. We are motivated by people, by human beings, and how they're affected. And so the hurricane, for example, yes, it was there. I went there for hurricane relief, but in a medical sense. So helped with clinics, clinics that would have been short staffed and stuff when we saw some patients and stuff there. But I would like actually take a step back and say the act of being there was what was more impactful, I think, in the long term, because now I really understand what a hurricane does to a country. When you see some of the destruction and you're like, how on earth did that house come down? Or how on earth did these massive metal poles just get warped? Like, it really sets in your mind like this thing called a hurricane is really destructive. And you just can't get that idea unless you see some of that stuff. You see some of the roads that were just ram-packed. You speak to people who said, they couldn't get out of their area for weeks because the roads were all down and there weren't support services and food was hard to find. And then it adds when you hear that, okay, there might not have been that many deaths there, but within the next month, there was an increased number of deaths within the population just because of the fact that the healthcare system was affected. So, you go there to help, yes, but when your ears and eyes are open and you meet people and you see their faces, you really appreciate just how devastating something like this is. And it really motivates you. For example, in this case, it was a hurricane. It really motivates you that climate change is going to become much worse because these type of hurricanes are going to become much more frequent and much worse. And so you feel more compelled to work in those fields, to advocate for those fields, because you can see the human cost of these terrible disasters.
What kind of help were you able to provide?
So when I went there, was not in the acute setting. What I mainly did was work in some of the clinics that were been understaffed. So we did some outreach clinics, and you'd find, you tend to go to these things thinking that you're going to treat like these trauma conditions, etc. And you realize that chronic medical conditions. And the lack of support for chronic medical conditions is what leads to most of the mortality after disasters. It's just the lack of a functional healthcare system is what leads to excess deaths.
It's less like a door falling on somebody and more somebody couldn't get their heart medication.
Pretty much. Like if you think about that hospital that saved, your loved one's life when they had a heart attack, just think, if that hospital was closed for a month when they had, what would have happened to them and all the other people who have to get care? What if you just removed that system? No one can get dialysis for a month. What happens? And that's something that we're realizing more and more that has a tremendous impact on mortality.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're cracking open a couple of doors here because it's at least the way you just phrased how you just defined a hospital. Maybe even shifting a paradigm in my own head, in that, yes, I think of it basically as a place I'll go if I got really, really sick. But for people who are in a medical situation where it's about management, right, it becomes as critical as it's kind of the fourth pillar, like going to church, going to school, going to the hospital. So however you access that, right? You're now tethered to that forever, with serious implications if that tether is broken.
Right. And these are the things I say. You have to go there to really experience and understand these things.
Yeah.
So like while we were there, we realized that it really struck home. And one of the things that I'm sure we still mainstream doesn't understand, there were a lot of pharmaceutical companies manufacturing plants based in Puerto Rico. So when the hurricane devastated a lot of those manufacturing plants, there were lots of shortages that affected mainland USA. And so you may think this hurricane affected Puerto Rico.
Right.
But like for those of us that were still working in hospitals in the United States, we're like, why is it so difficult to get normal saline, for example? There was a manufacturing plant there. And I use normal saline. I'm pretty sure that was one of the things I'm thinking about. But there were definitely medications, etc., that you were accustomed having. And then it took a while to realize, well, we're not getting these particular medications. Don't quote me on normal saying, but we're not getting these medication supplies because a lot of the U.S. supply was dependent upon Puerto Rico,
Right.
and it really shows that interconnectedness and how health is affected in ways that you just cannot think about. It's like
Right.
with the COVID pandemic, things were affected in ways that you could not have imagined
I could not
until it
or
happens.
predicted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking about highly impacted systems, I don't have the exact date in front of me, but about a year and a half plus ago, a war breaks out in Ukraine, and eventually you join a nonprofit that is providing some healthcare. I'll let you define that in Ukraine. Just walk us through a little bit about how you even got connected to this group, your desire to go, what it was like going, what you did when you were there. I'll let you take that wherever
So-
you feel comfortable.
Yeah, so for some reason, I think since someone first told me about Doctors Without Borders and the work that they do, I have this sort of almost morbid fascination, even with working in conflict zones. Just the idea that, humans actually do this to each other, and this is how bad things get in places like
Maybe
conflict
morbid is not the best way to hear about it. I will get you.
However, it is.
Yeah, yeah, I
The
get you.
situations are what they are.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when that conflict happened in the Ukrainian Russian conflict happened, of course, I wanted to go in some capacity. And there was an NGO. I was in a disaster medicine fellowship at the time, and one of the other my co-fellows then was going to deploy. We deployed to Poland, not to Ukraine itself.
Right,
And this
right.
was in February of, let me get this straight, 2022.
Right,
Yes,
right.
February 22, shortly after the conflict started. And so at that time, we were thinking of needs-based assessment to decide on setting up a field hospital. And it was just such a fluid situation. It was sort of difficult to come up with a real answer towards where to best place healthcare services. And so this is what is interesting. You think you go there and you're going to just treat wounds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then you get there and you realize the people who were coming across the border were the people who were able to escape. If you were trapped and you were injured
Yeah.
somewhere on the other side, the east of the country, you had a harder time crossing the border. Also, by the time we had gotten there, they were no longer allowing, Ukraine wasn't allowing men to leave the country.
Oh.
So
Huh.
it was just these women and children crossing the border.
Damn.
Like women and children crossing the border. And you would just see the numbers and you would see the border crossings every day. Just buses and buses of people crossing.
And so which town was this in Poland where you seen the crossing?
So we went to a couple of different ones. We ended up settling. So it's a pronunciation of these Polish words is kind of tricky, but there was a place called Szemsza, which is where the largest crossing is. So if you see pictures and images that typically came from there.
Okay.
But we ended up settling in a place a little further north called Helm, which was about an hour from the actual border itself. But either way, the situation was the same. It was every day you would have these huge reception centers, and that's where we kind of based ourselves, providing some healthcare within the refugee reception centers. So they would cross the border, and the buses would bring them straight to these refugee reception centers, where ideally they would spend 24 hours, but some centers were different, and some centers people spend a lot more time, where you would just have these, imagine a hollowed out mall, just ram-packed with beds and people, just circulating in and out, If it worked well, people came in, and within 24 hours, they were on buses leaving. If they had destinations.
Leaving to where? Or if they had destinations.
If they had destinations. Earlier on, it was almost kind of scary. Earlier on, you would just have people coming across the border and people just coming and offering them rides. And if you think about it, you have a bunch of women of childbearing age, you have a bunch of children, and some unknown person just picking them up. I mean, this is like a haven for traffickers, right? For human traffickers. So, and I still don't know if we have all the information as how many refugees were trafficked or ended up in very compromising situations. It'd be hard to ever get that kind of information, I think. But yeah, these are the type of things people face just crossing the border, trying to escape the violence.
Right.
In terms of what we did, we typically help provide care, or advisory care, within those refugee reception centers.
Okay,
So the medical point, so to speak, would be staffed by local Polish medics. And, we'd sort of be there saying, okay, I think this person needs to go to hospital. I think this is a problem. This could be appendicitis, or this is probably not appendicitis. Just watch this a little bit.
But it sounds like, based on who was actually crossing the border, the cases probably weren't as serious.
I'll put it this way: there wasn't as much medical care as
Okay.
we thought would be required. What you did see, the especially among the elderly population, you would find a lot of cases of just really uncontrolled hypertension. Now,
Okay.
it may not sound bad, but if you have uncontrolled hypertension, it really increases your chance of getting a heart attack or a stroke. And so, a lot of the elderly would not have had their medications because they're left in a hurry. And so just being able to sort out, well, we can use these medications instead because you don't have your regular prescriptions, etc. Those are some of the things we were able to help do.
Okay.
In addition, there was an outbreak, a GI outbreak, of vomiting and diarrhea, in the setting at one day, and I think we were able to really go through the kitchen and figure out the refrigeration process of the food that was being provided and stuff, just to help ensure that people don't get diarrhea while they're traveling on buses for 18 hours, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think those things were able to have a pretty good impact.
Okay. So you returned a couple months ago. In what capacity? How was this trip different? Tell us more.
So returning was this was my first, I guess, humanitarian trip after completing my critical care fellowship, which
Okay.
I just finished that a couple of months ago. One of the aspects that I really liked about the critical care fellowship is that we do a lot of training in point of care ultrasound.
Oh, okay.
And so in the capacity with which I went with this other NGO called Med Global,
Okay. So this is different to the first group you went with.
yes, it's a different group.
Okay.
So the first time we went to Poland, and that was with GoDocs. And this trip was in Ukraine itself, was in Kiev. And this was with a different group called Med Global. And Med Global has a fairly long-standing relationship with Ukraine since this conflict happened, and provides a lot of different aspects of care. When the Novokovka Dam was blown, for example, they provided a lot of equipment. They've been doing a lot of these kind of equipment and training. One aspect of the training they help provide is ultrasound training. And I took part as a group of physicians to do some trainings for physicians there.
So I remember when you were there, and you sent me a couple of videos of being in a hotel, and a kind of 360 view of what was around your hotel and the protocols that you had to have if the bomb siren went off. And I try to be a reflective human being, and I think of you just as a friend, first of all, and you being in a war zone, right? And it's a little surreal, right? It's a little surreal to sit in the life I am living, and be witness, right, to your presence in a place that was under international attack. I just wondering if you could kind of walk us through your mindset from everything, right? In terms of, did you fear for your safety? Did you think about, the rest of the country and what they've experienced? Like what it meant to be there, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Tell us what you're able to do to help. Like what it's like to be a physician, but just also a human and an international person in that situation.
Yeah, that's you go through a lot when you're in a situation like that.
Yeah.
I would preface by saying that I did not feel unsafe.
Okay.
And it could be it could be, I just wanted to feel that way, or it could be because
And you're in Kiev, to be fair, but
we,
still.
right, we have the sense that the air defenses in Kiev are pretty good. So I kind of felt that we just kind of felt well protected. Had we gone like to the east, where there's a couple more attacks, there's a little closer to the conflict, would be a different situation. But at least for a sense of security or not, I felt fairly safe. Um, what was interesting is that Kiev had about a 3-month period in which they weren't attacked, and the night we arrived, they had the largest barrage in, like 3 months. And so we arrived there, and we had to decide when we landed there. I think it was like 10:30 at night, and the curfew was going to be in like an hour and a half, and we had to decide: do we stay there and wait out the air attacks, or do we and shelter in that place close to the train stations, or do we try to get to our hotel as quickly as we can? And we really had to make that decision because if we didn't leave soon enough, then the curfew came into effect, and we'd have to spend our entire first night, just kind of huddling around the train station. So that we very quickly realized, okay, we were in a different situation than when we left
Right.
in Poland. And then the next morning, this was really interesting. Just sort of heard a noise that you didn't think about very seriously, and then we saw these air trails, and there's a particular pattern and a particular noise that our Kiev host said that particular sound is the sound of Patriot missiles. We know what those Patriot missiles sound like. So like we were there having breakfast.
Well, is there something just really quickly audience should know about Patriot missiles? Like anything specific about the way they attack or they, versus other kinds of missiles? I guess.
Okay. Oh, so the context is Patriot missiles are the air defense, classically the air defense missile that Kiev has received from the US.
Okay.
And so what the Patriot missiles do is they're supposed to be really, really good at shooting down, enemy missiles, whether
Okay. So you,
whichever form of
so that pattern was you viewing a missile that was meant to shoot down an enemy missile.
right.
Okay.
And so the pattern we saw was primarily that, but there were other air trails that would have been
Okay.
the actual missile.
Yeah.
And it really is surreal when you're having breakfast and you realize, okay, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And then the thing about the air raid sirens, sometimes you would hear or see something, and then the air raid sirens would go in. So the air raid sirens have mixed utility in that if the sirens are after the event, then they aren't much help. But there certainly were times that we had to go to the nearest bomb shelter, which was located pretty close to the hotel, and just wait it out there until we got the signs on the apps that the air raid sirens are off.
So was your group able to provide care in that time?
So what we did, this role was not to provide care, but to provide training.
Okay.
And I think that feels especially powerful because these are to physicians who would be going to the front lines. A lot of these folks would be dealing with patients on the front line. So some of these would be doctors who have been taking care of patients in their hospitals for years, like since this conflict started. Like these people have been working very, very hard. We talk about medical burnout here, but in a conflict zone is a whole
Yeah.
new.
It's a whole other level.
It's a whole new level. Yeah, it's a whole new level.
Yeah. So I'm gonna tell me a little bit about Vipassana. I just want to bring this up and kind of know about it obviously through you and others actually. I remember Yuval Harari talks about it in one of his books, and how practicing Vipassana is kind of, he says many things, but I'll just quickly summarize in that focus to write and kind of keep a clear head and knowing how dedicated you are to this reflective practice of meditation. Any element of that really came in handy or was helpful in a time when you're feeling so many things?
Oh yeah.
Maybe since my introduction probably wasn't great, you could tell the audience what Vipassana is in your telling.
Okay, yeah. So Vipassana is your sort of meditative practice that's about 2,500 years old at least, and essentially it's about observing the body sensations and just maintaining a clear mind about it. It's not like breath control or mind control or anything, but it's more about just observing and seeing things for what they are without trying to control anything, without wishing that they were different, or wishing that something is there that's not there, or wishing that something that's there is not there. You're just saying, this is how it is. You accept it, you see it for what it is. You just see it for what it is. And what that does is it just helps you to get to a space where whatever the situation is, you're like, okay, this is the situation.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
Right.
try to fuss. I'm not going to fight. This is right now what the situation is. And you just accept that particular reality at that particular time. So it really helps you to, a lot of questions come up like, why do people have to suffer? Why do bad things happen, etc. There's a lot of these kind of existential questions that you always tend to ask. When it helps to say, okay, first of all, this is what it is. It just is. I can't explain everything. This is what it is. And then within that space of quiet and sense of calm, what you're able to then do is sort of create that resolve to contribute to things in a positive manner. So I would like to put it like this. Like, if there's a stressful situation and you become stressed out, then you contribute to the stress that's existing. If there's a stressful situation, and instead of being stressed out, you're able to get to this place where it's like, you see it for being a stressful situation. And then you're in a better place to start plotting an escape from that particular stressful or unhappy situation. And so you help to be in a more constructive place at the time that something not good is happening.
Right.
And I think just being able to be in that space helps a lot, because first aid providers or even caregivers, there's a lot of burnout, because you can, in medicine, you can see a lot of things that are unpleasant, a lot of suffering, etc. In what do you call them? Like disaster response workers, PTSD is a thing. If you witness PTSD, it's not, I won't say it's as bad as, but just simply witnessing traumatic situations can lead to you having PTSD. And so if you want to have longevity of practice and you want to have a career where you can continuously be useful rather than being like a spent shell, it's important to always be able to refresh yourself. Not feel guilty for something that you couldn't help or not, so that you try to remain in a center of, okay, this is something is happening, I see it for what it is. It's not pleasant, but instead of becoming tied up in that moment, you help keep yourself in a phase of, okay, I'm going to be productive and act in a way that helps the situation in the future.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me of I was listening to a psychologist one time, and I think he's actually Trinidadian, where he said something that I thought I hadn't thought about it in this way. I can't remember what the topic of the lecture was or the conversation was, but he was saying that the term dehumanization is often used in this kind of derogatory, negative way, and he said that's sort of the wrong way to think about it. The dehumanization is not whether it's good or bad. He's like, when is it appropriate? Because if I'm a doctor, or if I'm somebody who is dealing with kind of daily trauma or dealing with people, like I can't be emotionally connected to every individual. There's no way I could do my job well, right? There's no way I could go home and be distraught with every death that happens in the hospital. And so it is appropriate in that circumstance. And it sounds like this is a little bit of what you're saying. It is a little appropriate to some acceptance. It's not that you become a stone cold human, but some acceptance that, it is what it is. And you need to be able to carry on with what you're able to help with without being like just fully attached to every trauma that's happening in front of you. Is that a fair characterization?
Oh, 100%. Like, you really have to be able to not accumulate, not carry around too much weight. Because if you're carrying a lot of weight, it's hard for you to be nimble and continue doing your work.
Right.
I'll give you this example. Like, when I left, we had when I left, even though I was just there for like a week on this particular trip, right? When I was actually crossing that border from Ukraine back into Poland, I just felt very, very emotional. And in a sense, almost, and this is really strange I realized this was happening to me, almost a sense of guilt because there's a lot of people that we'd gotten very close to a lot of people. There's a lot of people we spent, 9, 10 hours a day with, right? When you spend 9 to 10 hours a day with people for like 5, 6 days, 7 days straight, you become attached to them. You form friendships. And as you leave the country and you go back and you physically step across the border into safe territory, then you feel as if, you've abandoned your friends.
Yeah.
You've just walked out on them. You're like, hey, look, I'm here to help. And you're like, okay, peace out. I'm gone. I'm go back to my life where things are safe and, halfway across, the world, across the Atlantic Ocean to a very protected place in the United States. And you feel like you abandoned your friends. I had a meeting, we had a debrief meeting with the team, like weeks later. And I said, just by the way, anybody else felt like that? And like everybody said they do. What I do, like right now, I'm pulling up my phone. You see, like I'm showing Brian here my Kiev air alerts. I kept my, there's an app that we use for Kiev air alerts when there's attack. I kept this on because to me, it makes me feel connected to the reality that my friends in Kiev are living under. And funny enough, I was not the only one to do that on the team.
And everybody did this independent of each other, knowing.
Yeah, and not everybody, at least not everybody confessed. But, there are things we each went through individually that we didn't even realize that we were going through this at the time and things we did.
Right.
But we did have the benefit of having such a good team that we spoke about these things afterwards and then realized, oh, damn, this stuff is real. So there are people who spend like months in much more intense situations where they themselves are at risk. I mean, there are healthcare workers that literally get killed in the field. And, there's like rape, murder, kidnapping, etc. So our experience was fairly mild compared to what some healthcare workers do in certain situations. But it's real. And I think it's important for us, even this team, to understand what happens to us when we go into these situations and really work it through. Because if you don't, then you accumulate these things and you become a spent shell, somebody who becomes demotivated as time goes by. You just don't have the energy left to. And if you do that, then you don't help anybody anymore. You don't help yourself. You don't help, the cause, so to speak.
And it also sounds, based on the description you just gave of it, that there's a little bit where you have to be okay with being open to an experience you can't yet explain. Right? So you talked about kind of coming back and like you've gone through things that, you have gone through things, but you didn't quite know the what of what he would go through emotionally and psychologically until the post-processing state. And I just wonder if, and maybe I'm just speaking to people who, perhaps future students who kind of imagine themselves in a similar situation, right? I'm kind of speaking to them thinking like, well, that's kind of part of it, being open to a process that you don't know where it will take you.
That's 100% the reality. You step into these places because you know that there's a different situation in there that you can't understand in any other way besides going there.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say, 10,000 people were displaced. And it's easy for us to just say 10,000. But when you've literally seen women and children by the busloads, like just moving busily across the border, then that is what really wakes you up to like, man, these are human beings being affected. When you talk about attacks on Kiev and, affecting people's daily lives, so like, I know we now have colleagues there, like, medical students or young doctors that can't leave the country. They want to train, they want to subspecialize. I had the benefit of being able to leave my country in order to subspecialize and get higher education. Like, I have a friend there who can't because he's of military age. He is a male within the age group that his country doesn't allow him to leave because they're in the middle of a war, right? Like, that's a very, very serious thing. And the only way to really understand that, and from my point of view, is if you went there. Having gone there, it really energizes me to continue working in these fields. But you have to be aware that while you indulge in these experiences, so to speak, you ensure that you don't become weighed down or disaffected by the process. But don't get me wrong, even while we talk about this, I mean, it's an incredibly enriching experience to have that experience, to make those friendships, to work under those conditions. And so they're both things, you know, it's an incredibly enriching experience, but there's also things that you have to think about how these are affecting you, and they all happen
Yeah.
at the same time. And I think some of the contributions we're able to make, like, you know, people are just happy. There's a sense that, okay, we're not alone, right?
Yeah.
Even apart from the medical, the part that the fact that we turned up,
Yeah.
just the fact that we turned up meant a lot to a lot of people there. And those are the things that are hard to count, but that really helps people feel that they're not alone, that there are people who care,
Right.
and that help can still be coming. But then the medical training, I mean, and anybody who really took back from that training, they'll be providing medical care. They could be providing life-saving medical care based on something that we were able to teach in a relatively short space of time. And that really makes you feel empowered about your ability to impart
Yeah.
very, very useful information
Yeah.
and make real change.
I mean, I know I was half joking earlier about your plethora of fellowships.
You're not the only person who jokes about it. Like,
but
professional
I actually
fellowship
think on the
collective.
back end of it, like seriously, it I don't want to center myself here, but I think there's some similarities in the sense that what it feels has always guided you and your choices is your internal sense of why, and in pursuit of that why, right? The ability and opportunities to help people in their most vulnerable. And sometimes if you stick to the very traditional pathway of anything, right, whether it's going into academia as a college professor or being a medical doctor, you know, med school, residency, fellowship, practice, if you're more concerned about your why versus just concerned about getting the title, then what it means is you have to step outside of that pathway and find the things that lead you to your why. So it might appear to the naked eye as sort of kind of all over the place and doing this and doing that, but in the end is leading you just ever more closely to that place where you feel fulfilled, where you feel like you're really giving back. Do you feel that now?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, 100%. And I just want to re-emphasize, you know, one of the points that you're trying to make about why do we do things. And I think it's important to always try to be a bit altruistic about what you're doing. Because one, it helps increase the quality of what you're doing. But two, for yourself, as human beings, is this mechanism. Like if we think we're doing something that's really good, it benefits us first and foremost. Before it
Yeah, we
even
know that.
benefits.
Yeah, we know- that's-
before it even gets to the point of manifesting into an action that you take.
Helping you makes me feel good.
Yeah, and it may seem strange, but it's part of how we work. Like if you think about doing something good to help someone, you already get that little bit of a warm, fuzzy feeling side, and that counts, right? So, and then when you can see something that you put in motion kind of take off a little bit, and you know it's doing more good, and that kind of feeds back to you too. And I think it's really good for us to emphasize that that's what we should be focusing on, like, you know, in whatever field that you do. It should not be about the like accolades or, you know, I mean, compensation is really important, but it shouldn't be all about compensation.
Right.
And then in all our lives, I'm sure we've had people, you know, coaches, teachers, etc., who just did it because they wanted to see us become really good. Like we all had people
Right.
who, you know, like high school teachers, for example,
Yeah.
who they complain about their pay at the same time, but they're in the job, they're on time,
yeah.
giving 110%,
Right.
because they really wanted to see us do good,
Right.
right? And so those are the type of people I think that I find really inspiring. People who do stuff because they're just motivated by
Yeah.
what they can do.
Yeah.
And I think trying to be that person is a good pattern to live your life.
Can relate.
Yeah.
So, just to wrap up here a little bit, tell us how all of this vast, diverse experiences have culminated into your current position? Like, how are you bringing elements of everything we've just discussed, both your volunteer work, your professional work, your training, your why? How is it being reflected in your current position?
So one, the fact that I have this current position is
Hey, I got a job.
it's
right?
like wow. Because I found it a bit, when you have an atypical pathway, and I want to say this to sort of encourage people to follow a position. One, it was actually kind of hard to find a job.
Yeah.
When I said, here, this is what I wanted in my training, and people are like, okay, nice, it's cute, cute, but we're not sure what to do with it. But my current job, they were actually starting to look at getting, like a cadre of critical care infectious disease doctors, because they don't have, the idea of being a critical care doctor who followed the infectious disease pathway to becoming a critical care doctor. It's a fairly rare pathway in the US. Most people do like pulmonary critical care.
Okay.
So when you say infectious disease critical care, does it raise an eyebrows? Like, what? We didn't know you could do that. We don't trust you, that kind of thing. We don't want you. So I definitely had some of that. But it really reinforced to me when I got this job, which was they basically expressed interest in all the things that I'm expressing interest in.
Right.
Giving me that, that freedom to do the kind of things I want to do. It really was, really was comforting to me that, you could do the things that you're motivated by and in a sense, follow your unique pathway and you will get to a good place.
Yeah.
You will just get to a
trust the
good place.
process, basically.
And so my current role, part of what I'm going to be working on is the global health department, teaching students procedures. I just did some training in Zambia with an infectious disease fellowship that I've had some relationship with for a while. I did some point of care ultrasound training. And, every now and then, about 2 weeks ago, I got a picture with them using the ultrasound machine.
Right.
I'm like, damn, I feel good about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So they're really happy to get that training. I'm really excited that they're using it. It's a win-win situation. And this current job is really one that's also, they would like to see global health work be part of what I do.
Right.
And they're also an institution that has a lot of, a large footprint in the infectious disease world. They do have a footprint in the disaster world. So I just expect to continue doing all these things in a more professional way. And I'm really excited about it.
Okay.
To have an employer that is interested in what you're interested in is
Yeah.
rare, but it's worth the search.
Yeah, I understand, man. Dr. Vijay Bhola, presentation college class of 1998.
Now that I've called it.
yeah. I should have led with that. Hey, man. Thanks for being here.
All right. Thanks a lot, Brad.
Appreciate it. Knowledge Unbound is brought to you by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive Open STEM Education. You can catch all of our episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or on our website, knowledgeunbound.transistor.fm. I want to thank my guest, Dr. Vijay Bhola, for sharing his thoughts, his insights, his journey. I want to remind you not to forget to subscribe. And I want to thank especially my always loyal, my perpetual, my great producer, Segeva Masai. Segeva, I think they should hear your voice at the end. I feel they should hear you acknowledge my thank you, no?
Yeah. I just want to say it's always a pleasure to be here, to be producing this podcast, and definitely be exposed to, things I have never really heard before in terms of education, because, coming from a computer engineering student to biology education.
Yeah.
And then, having done engineering education research at some point in my undergrad
Yeah.
career,
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of similarities. But at the same time, you do see how differently things are done.
Well,
in
that's
other
part.
departments. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but that's kind of part of why I enjoy, having you here, but doing the podcast, because the themes that are being drawn out, it doesn't have to do with necessarily just biology or engineering or medicine or, in this case, medicine. It's education. Education is transformative. Education makes you think. Education makes you be challenged. Education wants to make you change the world and for the better. And I think I think Vijay really kind of shared that with us today. So thanks again. I want to remind you, my audience, we are here every Sunday. We have a 10 episode series. This was episode 4. As you go into the week, I wish you nothing but the very best. And please be excellent to each other.
First of all, we talk about thinking outside the box. I think that's too short-sighted. I like the idea of living outside the box, understanding that we all live in boxes. We live in our own boxes. That's just how life is.
Right.
But when you step out of your box, and traveling is kind of a really good way to do that, then you enter other people's, little cubicles and their boxes.
Right.
I think it doesn't really matter how much you read about something as a concept, but when you put faces to that concept, that to me really invigorates you to and makes you wake up to the idea, okay, this is something I would really like to have an impact, and this is something I'd really like to work on.